What is up, and welcome into this week's edition of the Above Average Dynasty podcast, where today we're going to be going through all of our picks. We're going to go through as much as we can. I'm not sure how far we're going to get, maybe around. We'll definitely get around. We might get two. But before we get into that, I'm your host, Charlie, as always, with Kulek. How you doing today, brother?
I'm doing great this dreary Sunday morning in the Motor City. We set records during the weekend. It was an awesome weekend for Detroit, really.
My God, that must have been a fun experience. That would have been a fun experience to have gone to the draft. It always feels like it might be a fun experience, but then it feels like you're just kind of standing at a party where nothing, where like
Right.
every 10 minutes something happens. So it's like you're mostly just hanging out, right?
A lot of my friends who are like 21 to 27 went and loved it and just stood there and drank beer, until they fell over. But yeah, it was warm and then it was cold and then just waiting around a lot. And lucky for them, I think for all five picks that the Lions made, I think they made five, maybe six. All five picks the Lions made, they traded up for every pick. So that was kind of nice, probably for them. But yeah, it was a great long weekend, and a lot of people had a good time. So
Absolutely. How was that Friday that you took off 'cause after you destroyed yourself on Thursday night?
yeah, no, it was fine. It was I had a lot of fun on Thursday night. I really appreciated all the people that came to our chat. That was a lot of fun. Um, that was fun. I love arguing when I have a few martinis in me. I get a little bit more rowdy.
Yeah,
So
we're gonna have a little
um,
drier of an argument today, but I have a
yeah, now I
feeling
got coffee instead of instead of martini. So
there's going to be some arguing because we're not. A few weeks ago, we had a draft. We had a mock draft episode where we alternated. So there's not. It's just pick who you want and talk about it. This week,
yeah,
we have to badger our way through each pick at a time and coming to, I wouldn't say agreement because there's definitely going to be a picks where we don't agree, but at least
right.
coming to a begrudging understanding of who should go into that slot. So why not? I'm just going to get us started off, and I'm just going to slot Caleb
We
Williams
should,
in at one,
you
right?
know, well, what we should do first, we should set up a quick rough format of a
Mm,
roster and maybe pick a need that we have or something like that. We should set up some sort of criteria because again, a lot of these drafts are going to be league dependent for people. So let's create just a rough concept of what like start three wide receivers, start two running backs. We'll
I was about to say
have
it's.
three
I think
flexes,
standard
super flex.
do standards typically one quarterback, one super flex, two running back, three wide receiver, one tight end, three flex. Your standard 12 team
You want
start
to have
11.
PPR for
PP
so PPR, and then what do you want to do for tight end premium?
half tight end premium. So one. So
Let's do it.
yeah. So it's tight ends are good. They are nice flexes, but they are not broken in the way that they are in the leagues that we play in, where
Yeah,
it's a full tight end premium. So you just want to flex every single tight end you can manage, you can get your hands on, which. And you just take it up to not to get too into the weeds, but you ratchet it up by you create custom leagues where you have that format, and then you add a second tight end starting slot. So you just make basically the tight end one more valuable than the wide receiver one. It's a bizarre format. I have a lot of picks in
I
that
mean,
format.
you could even argue that the tight end one is worth more than the quarterback one, even though. So if it was super flex, I'd say that since it's two quarterback, that's probably not true, but it's close.
It's close, but it's a weird format. I try to always wrap my head around, and I struggle. But so
Yeah, good luck. Let me
it's
know if you ever get that.
it's a pretty.
'Cause I
Let's.
don't know what I'm doing.
I think we should probably, if we wanted to have a league format where we generalized what our team need was, how about we
Right.
go? I would let's just go. mm,
Like we don't have a QB3.
yeah, let's. Well, yeah. Do we have that for each pick, or do we have that for? Do we have that
Well,
like?
I mean, after we take Caleb, we will have a QB3.
Yeah. So let's. Yeah. Let's just assume our team kind of needs a quarterback a little bit, like, but
Okay.
it's a pretty balanced roster. So
Okay.
I don't think we have to argue too much on quarterback or on with the 101, right?
No, not with Odunze landing there and Keenan there over the free agency. Yeah, I mean that's easy. To me, it got a lot easier after the draft.
which is funny because I don't think the draft went pretty. In some ways, went very chalk. In other ways, didn't. But I think Caleb got what we expected him to get, and I would argue Marvin got exactly what we wanted him to get. Right? He went to a
Yeah.
like outside of maybe going to the Chargers, but even then, Harbaugh's shown he wants to bludgeon you with his offensive line more than he wants to throw to his fancy wide receivers. It almost feels like Arizona is literally the perfect spot for him.
No, it does absolutely. That's a great point, and I think they went to exactly where they were supposed to go and where we wanted them to go. Um, as a fan of a team in the NFC North, I'm kind of used to the Bears kind of messing up the draft a little bit.
No,
So I think for me, it was more.
not in the
What's that?
pace, not in the polls era. That man actually is pretty damn. He did that one trade where he got fleeced by the Steelers with what's his face? Fuck.
Chase Claypool.
With Claypool, where he gave up
Yeah.
the 33rd pick for Claypool, or I think the 32nd
Brutal.
pick, because that was when the Dolphins got their pick vacated. So he
Yeah.
gave up basically a first rounder for Chase Claypool. But again, that was him trying to address the wide receiver. He knew he needed weapons. He just didn't pick the right one, which is understandable.
Right.
But yeah, he's been knocking it out of the park.
Right, and I think it was more for me to draft Caleb over Marvin. I think we talked about it. What was it, the last podcast, or it might have been over the during our live stream of the draft. But we were probably going to do it most times anyways. I think we were both kind of like, you were probably like 90-10, and I was more like 75-25. But I think just the Bears doing what they were supposed to do. Now I'm 90-10, and you're probably 100-0. So.
Which is weird
it was
because
just solidifying it.
even in that time, I've become more fond of Marvin. I actually think he's better than I thought he was, but because I think there was a point where I was like, might be a little overrated, but that was a little bit foolish of me. I was you get into this draft cycle where you just start nitpicking guys, and it's like, no, this guy's just outstanding. Like I don't know if he's but I just have a hard time of just buying wide receivers for that expensive of a price over a quarterback for that.
I almost feel like we should just lock in the first two. I feel like we're both consensus with the first two.
I would agree.
There's definitely a tier break.
I would 100% agree. Now, this is where I think you get to an interesting pick because I feel like you might disagree with me. The next tier is a tier of two, and I'm 50-50 on which one should go first.
Agreed. No, I'm agree 100%. I think with our team having just picked Caleb, I think it gets a little bit easier for us. However, with that being said, if you didn't get a chance to draft Caleb and you're now picking third, I think it's really, really, really interesting. And I'm like you, I'm 50-50. I could go either way. How do you lean?
I lean Jaden Daniels just ever so slightly. I think he's a good enough prospect. He's got a good enough situation, and he's got enough rushing upside that he just barely edges out what I think is a legendary level wide receiver prospect in Malik Neighbors in terms of from a fantasy aspect.
Right.
So it's like if he went to a worse situation.
Really so listen, I think you made I remember this. You made and I know you don't think I remember a whole lot from that live stream, but I remember you saying this. You said that you were questioning whether does Rome have more of the physical attributes that the Giants need in a wide receiver with them having all those small slot guys. And then they drafted Neighbors, and we like the situation, we like the prospect, and we kind of moved on after that. But I remember you saying that, and I thought a lot about it. And I do fear a little bit that he gets mixed up kind of in that wide receiver shuffle. He has the talent far superior to any of those wide receivers. My question is, I'm imagining a big-bodied receiver just demanding targets from Daniel Jones, saying, get me the ball, and he's getting open, and Daniel Jones is under pressure because their own line is bad, and he's throwing these jump balls, and and somebody like Odunze would be getting, 6 receptions, 11 targets, and like a touchdown or 2. Like it would be kind of weird stats like that. And I wonder, is Neighbors going to be able to command the targets in that offense, running the routes that he does? And again, I believe he was it him who was all green on those wide receiver charts?
Odunze was the all green. Neighbors had a And Neighbors had a couple reds. I couldn't remember off the top of my head. I think it was like an out or a comeback where he had a red.
Yeah. So is he going to be able to? So my question is: he going to be able to demand that target share? Is he going to be able to? Is Daniel Jones going to be able to get him the ball at the elite level that we kind of need him to get, especially in that offense?
Well,
Not being elite.
well, I think the most important thing for me is he is the best weapon the Giants have right now by a good amount. So it's like they're going to be incentivized to get him the football. So it's like
Mhm.
I think that's where you end up getting the amount of targets and volume that you want. It's just not going to be as efficient as you like because he's the lone
Yeah.
wolf. He's not a complete prospect yet from a wide receiver standpoint. His quarterback's not outstanding, but I think you're getting plenty out of him. But I think we do agree. Let's let's go in,
Do you,
lock in.
do you think it changes anything if Waller retires? Does that put him closer to Daniels in your mind?
I guess in
Because
my
he's already
mind,
close.
Waller is already retired, even though he's not, because
Okay.
he's been such a non-factor. I think if Waller comes, I think it goes either way. If Waller plays, he
Yeah.
takes some of the pressure off of Neighbors and lets him operate
Yeah.
more on outside, and Waller dominates the inside. If he's gone, the other tight ends step up, and it's just more of a vacuum for him to
Yeah.
step in and take volume. It's either you good either way.
Neighbors will go as Daniel Jones will go, and that will be a storyline to watch during the season.
Or Jones will be lifted by Neighbors. We'll find out. Moving on to I think the true difficult. This last tier there was a coin flip. I think this next tier is where you could go in any which way, and I think we our team and our theoretical team could use a quarterback for each pick, so
Okay.
that might
Yeah.
skew us a little bit in a certain way. But this is where the draft. I could see any player going at 5 based on how someone's proclivities, how they approach drafting in general, what their team need is. I'm curious because we thought about this a lot for probably an hour. Who's your 105 right now if you had to take it?
So I'm going back and I'm looking and I'm thinking about situations. I'm thinking about half tight end premium.
Have you sobered up and come to the right side of the aisle?
I'm thinking. I'm thinking. First of all, have I sobered up? I've sobered up in one sense, but have I sobered up in another sense? I'll tell you. Give me the guy who's throwing to the best wide receiver I've seen since Calvin Johnson. So no, I have not sobered up in that
Ouch.
regard. No, I want JJ McCarthy. And again, for everyone who did not watch on Friday, or Thursday, I am a big Michigan State fan. I do not like JJ McCarthy. I would like to root against JJ McCarthy. I do not like the Viking. I can't wait to root against both of them. With that being said, I want the guy throwing to the best receiver in the NFL. Thank you very much.
For however long he's actually doing it.
Correct.
We don't know how long he's gonna do it. The situations change. Situations are fluid.
Situations are fluid. I don't know if they're going to sign JJ to an extension, if he's going to be traded. I don't know if Darnold is going to start. There's a lot of variables that go into this decision. I think the easier pick would probably be, and I'm guessing it's for you, it's probably May.
It is. I flipped a coin a bunch of times this morning between my 5 and 6, but I did settle on Drake May being my 5.
It's such a tough receiving room to get excited about. I almost feel like
They drafted some folks. They drafted some people.
They drafted some people. And it'll be interesting to see with Antonio Gibson and Ramondre Stevenson how much running of the ball they do. Is it going to be a run-heavy team? Is it going to be like the Chargers we expect to be? Or is it going to be more of a high-flying, high-octane where they're trying, wide receiver screens and end arounds and things like that? Is it, like, I get to say this, is it like a Lions-ish offense? I don't know.
So I don't know if we're going to come to a consensus, and I think this is where the tough part about this offseason and this draft process is going to go is I don't know if there is going to be a solid consensus of which one of these quarterbacks you should take first. I've seen even in the last 24 hours plenty of takes on either side of the aisle in terms of which you should go first. I'm of the opinion that I think a similar opinion I was last Thursday is at the end of the day, I just want to take the guy who I think is a better football player. Now, I think there's a decent
Sure.
chance that Drake May just winds up being a Sam Darnold-esque prospect where you're just like, he's good. He's going to a defensive coach. His weapons room is not on that level, obviously, of the Vikings, who the Vikings have arguably the best weapons room in all of football, maybe one of the
Yeah.
best. But at the end of the day, I I don't feel comfortable taking a quarterback who I just don't think is as good as the one. And if I'm being honest, if
Yeah.
this was my team at 5, unless I really needed a quarterback, I can tell you I would probably not take either of these quarterbacks. Mostly just because I just wouldn't want either of them on my team. I just mostly just because I don't know. I don't know which one of them is good. I don't know which one of them is going to succeed. If I'm at this spot at 5 for most of my teams, I'm picking Neighbors or Odunze because I know Odunze is good and I know he
Mm.
will eventually be good. But conventional wisdom says
Even if he gets JSN for 2 years.
even if he gets JSN for 2 years, and I think he will get JSN for 1 year. I don't.
You
I
don't think
think
they're going to extend Keenan Allen?
I think Keenan Allen is going to deteriorate in a way that like eventually a 33-year-old wide receiver should.
Like a Julio Jones, soft tissue injuries, pulling a hammy every 4 games,
Yeah, and I don't.
something like that.
And it feels bad, especially because I think in my mind Keenan Allen's going to stick around for a little while, just because his game is not predicated on pure athleticism; it's predicated on being a technician and being a really skilled wide receiver. But at the end of the day, eventually the physical tools kind of take away from you, and these older players start to decline in a way you wouldn't expect. That
Do you
in a way like Stephon Diggs did, where you don't expect Stephon Diggs to go from top 5 wide receiver to you might be like top 12, just because it's like eventually you do hit that wall as an older player.
Very true. I mean, I think one for me, it'll be interesting to see, having watched the Bears twice a year, every year, what type of offense they instill. Obviously, it was very, I don't even know the right word for it. I watched a lot of tape on it, and I couldn't tell if the plays were bad or if Fields was bad.
I think it was a little bit of
And
both. As
I think it was a little bit of both.
watching a
Not,
lot of
like there
QB
were,
school, some of those plays were bad.
yeah, yeah. There was times where the plays just did not make sense. There was no outcome of the play where you're like, okay, this is going to be successful. But also, Fields was like, I don't want to say a one read quarterback, but it was like a 1/2 read and then take off. And so Caleb, obviously doesn't have quite the athleticism that Fields has. So it'll be interesting to see what type of offense they want to instill, especially with, like you said, an aging. And I hesitate to call him the wide receiver one on that team because we both really adore um, DJ Moore. So, I mean, just a lot of questions that need to be answered with the offense and Odunze's situation. But I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I don't love either of the quarterbacks. It's not like I'm dying. Well, here's what I'll say: if you're going to take a quarterback, which one do you think has a better chance to start this year?
I mean, we talked about it. I honestly don't know because I think both
I don't
have.
know either.
I think both are viewed kind of as May is viewed more of as a project, mostly just because he's viewed as a guy. He has viewed as higher potential, so almost his potential is his higher ceiling is dinging him in a way that like he's not reached it. So it'd be better for him to sit a year. Whereas like JJ McCarthy's ceiling isn't as high, so he's closer to it. So he's not deemed as a project. So therefore, he might start a little quicker.
Isn't the quarterback that's in front of him just? I mean, I like Darnold. I think Darnold is better than people give him credit for. With that being said, I still think he's worse. And I think I said this on the pod or on the live stream that he's kind of just worse than Jacoby Brissett. And so, because I think he's closer to his ceiling already, and I think that Darnold is worse than Brissett, I think McCarthy has a better chance of starting this year, which means then May has a better chance of being cheaper later into the season if you want to think about buying either quarterback. So, I mean, there's some thoughts in which are going to start, and can you get them cheaper later on if they don't? Things like that go into uh, me saying JJ McCarthy. It's not just throw to JJ equals good. It's not pull. I mean, it kind of is, but it's not too. It's kind
Yeah,
of
I mean, some of this is about value preservation, right? It's just you
it
want.
has to be in the game.
I think we'll lock in. I'll take this one, and we'll lock
May
in
is very reasonable here. Like,
JJ at 5.
no, go lock in May because I really think honestly, if it was a league where I was already entrenched in like the top 3 or 4 and just needed a super solid prospect. I needed someone who I'm being honest with myself. I like JJ. I like the thought of JJ. If this was a team where I was rebuilding or if I was middle of the pack and I really needed to take a shot, I would easily pick JJ here over Drake May. But if I'm a top tier team, and a lot of our teams, I think both of us are generally top tier teams. I think the safer pick, I think the one where we believe in the quarterback more and we believe in the talent would be May. So I think we should lock in May. I'll give you that one.
So now, Odunze or JJ. Do you think probably JJ just because at some point the quarterback's got to win out over the wide receiver?
I mean, we both really like Odunze. We both really like Odunze. You know, again, right. If I'm a top tier team and I slightly need a quarterback, I probably go in JJ here. You know, if you can move down one spot and take Odunze and then use some extra draft capital to get, you know, like a Baker Mayfield or something, that just feels better to me. But yeah, I mean, I'm going JJ over Odunze, but I can see either way.
Yeah, I think at this point, if Odunze had gone to the Giants, I think I'd have slotted him above JJ in the scenario just because the situation would have been slightly better for him to succeed early on. Whereas like
Yes.
so it's more just about okay, I think in general you kind of have to take a good quarterback prospect over a great wide receiver prospect just because I think the value long term plays out better. Where I think like we talked about,
Right.
in the scenario where you're wrong about the quarterback, you know, Bryce Young versus Quentin Johnston, for example, like both of them are going to take a hit, but the quarterback, just because they're given a longer leash and it's not as a quarterback is expected to take some time to develop, has just you have a little bit longer a run to bail out of your position. Whereas if you're wrong about a wide receiver and he just starts sucking, that you're very quickly out of that capital.
I was going to say out of a lot of capital, a lot of asset. I agree 100%.
While I would probably have Odunze above, I understand wanting to take McCarthy here, but I will say we're at 7 now. It's Odunze, right?
It's easily Odunze.
Okay,
easily Odunze.
Which is crazy because we're in a half tight end premium league, but Bowers went to a weird spot. So Odunze.
So here's my question. So we're through what, 7 picks?
7 picks. We got Caleb, Marvin, Jaden, Neighbors, Drake May, JJ McCarthy, Romo Odunze.
For a lot of people listening, and ourselves included, we play in one tight end premium leagues. So my question is, for you, for any of these leagues that are one tight end premium, would you have selected Bowers over any of these picks?
I don't think I would have. I think it's very close, especially a one tight end premium league. I think it's exceptionally close. I think in a one tight end premium league, I would have probably taken him over McCarthy, just because again, I didn't have a good.
So then you're taking McCarthy at 8?
Yeah, McCarthy's right now hanging out my 8. I literally have him and Bowers 7 and 8, Bowers 7, McCarthy 8, Bowers at 1.4, McCarthy at 1.39. Just because it's like they're basically 7A, 7B, but it's like I do at the end of the day I do have to take players I believe in over players I don't believe in, and I believe in Bowers as like the second or third best player in this process, and I think if JJ McCarthy wasn't a quarterback, he would have been a second round pick.
That offense is going to be. I'll tell you this: I don't believe in the competition for targets that he's going to have for Bowers, right? I mean, Adams and, I like Jacoby Myers, and Zamir White has proved to be a decent enough running back to kind of open up that space a little bit. and then I think we both kind of adore, right, Michael Mayer. I mean, we were talking about Mayer as one of the best buys in the offseason, I think, at one point. He was
which
just so cheap.
hurts.
Hurts a lot, right? I think both of us bought some shares of him. That offense got really exciting really fast. I'm glad they didn't trade Devontae. I really like their coach. I really hated Josh McDaniels. Be really interesting to see what they do. I think honestly, I could imagine them being a top 7 or 8 offense.
I the only tough part of that is Minshew. Minshew's so he's limited. I like the stash. I think he's a great value at this point if you need a QB3. But if he's your NFL quarterback for an extended period of time, I just don't think you're gonna be all that successful.
He almost took Indiana to. He almost took the Colts to the playoffs. I mean, they were what? They were one play away.
That's true, but he was also the AFC West is a lot different than the AFC South as a whole.
Okay, so here's a side question really quick. So who does Minshew make better in that offense? Who's the buy in that offense than with him at quarterback? Is it Myers? Is it Bowers? Who does he make better? Because I don't think it's Devontae.
I don't. The problem is I don't think he makes anybody better because I just don't think he's the kind of quarterback that's going to support enough volume to support all of them across the board. I think he probably dings Devontae just because there's not going to be as much volume. So it's like Devontae is probably going to.
Zamir White a buy then?
Well, I mean Zamir White. Yeah, I mean Zamir White's just. I don't even think Zamir White. Zamir White is a struggle to be a buy right now because you're gonna have to pay. You're gonna have to pay for him like he's a starting NFL running back.
I think you can still get him for an early second, though. I mean, so it's going to creep up. I think over.
Would you like Zamir White or Jonathan Brooks right now? Because I think that's the price. It's like a 201. It's like which one?
I think you're right on the price. I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one. I really thought Chuba was going to be the buy. I really thought he was going to be the buy this year. I was really kind of surprised by. I really like that pick by Carolina. I was surprised by it. Probably Zamir White, but man, is that close! Holy smokes!
So I don't know if he's a. I don't know if Zamir's a buy. I think he's definitely a hold. Maybe a sell if you can get a first for Zamir White at some point. You just kind of. Well, I mean, at some point
I don't know.
Do you want to just bail and get your value off of I think he was like a 5th round pick, and we saw what happened to another 5th round pick out in the West with Blake Corum and Kyron
Williams.
But if someone's going to give you a future first for Zamir White, part of me is like you just kind of have to take that, even though it does ding you in the short term because I think he's actually going to be a pretty usable RB2 this year.
I think he's gonna be really good. I think that whole offense is gonna be good. I think it's gonna be more balanced and it's gonna be more structured than it was last year. You're not gonna have Devontae having 17 targets, some games. But again, I do think the stash is a significant upgrade over Aiden O'Connell, and
That's
Jacoby fair. And Adams were okay. They were okay, especially. So that's why my question was who. So. I felt like Aiden O'Connell helped out Jacoby Myers quite a bit because he really liked those intermediate throws. And that's why I thought Mayer was going to be a really good buy coming into this year, or part of the reason. And so I think Minshew, in his lack of arm strength, is going to help those intermediate routes, which, again, that could be Bowers, that could be Myers, that could be Mayer. I have no idea.
I think that entire offense is a little bit limited vertically speaking. That's the one thing that it just doesn't really have is the deep threat. Like and
they kind of just don't have the quarterback to do that, which is okay. So if he can be slightly above average in those intermediate throws, I think that offense is going to be actually really dynamic and really fun to watch.
Yeah. So I think we reach probably our first difficult, well, not our first, probably our third at this point. I think this is where another tier break happens, and I think we've got our next tier of Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix. I think there's probably other people that would slot other players in that area, but that's kind of where I've sit at it. Where would you kind of sit with this 109? would you in a vacuum lean a Bo Nix, or would you go for the guy that was probably more well regarded pre-draft in Brian Thomas Jr.? Or would you just be like, hey, Xavier Worthy just got first round draft capital and just went to the one man on the planet who can get him the ball that far down the field to match his speed?
The thing with Kansas City is they've always liked to spread the ball around. Kelsey was that main wide receiver one.
Unless your
He
name's
was the
Tyreek
guy
Hill.
getting right, but are we really right? That's a completely different. That's like the guy the Lions drafted in the sixth round, and he was undersized. I forget his name. He's a defensive tackle, I think. And they're like, well, and so in the Lions subreddit, who else is undersized at that position? Aaron Donald. I'm not saying he's going to be Aaron Donald, but they're both undersized. Yeah, so Xavier Worthy is not Tyreek Hill. That offense is not the same after Tyreek Hill left.
He's about 20 pounds lighter and 3 inches taller, so he's remarkably skinnier.
But also that offense operates a lot differently, I feel like, than it did with Tyreek Hill. And also what's the defensive scheme that everyone's playing against? Well, everyone's playing in the entire NFL is that 2 high safeties, right?
Too high man under. Yep.
2 high man under, exactly. And so that's changed quite a bit. And Tyreek was the one, and Kansas City was the one who kind of changed that and molded those defense to switch. So Kansas City does a lot of weird things with their receivers. There's a lot of end arounds. There's a lot of wide receiver screens. There's tight end screens. I don't know. Like, I agree with what you're saying, and I think a lot of people are going to just do that. Wide receiver, first round, Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes. I don't know. I don't think Rashid Rice is going to be suspended that long. Who knows? I just don't get the feel. I think it's 2 to 4 games.
I don't think Xavier Worthy will start week 1, even if Rashid Rice is suspended. That's just not the Chiefs. That's just not Andy Reid's MO. Andy Reid's MO is his offense is complicated, and rookies don't start. Like Tyreek didn't start, Sky Moore didn't start. I don't think Rashid Rice started. Like this, it's just a complicated offense for someone to just step right into. Now, I guess one thing I'd be curious about: Bo Nix or a wide receiver here, because I think in the very short period of time since the draft has ended, I think the one thing I've seen from maybe casual folks have Xavier Worthy here, but I think the experts would have Bo Nix here as a top 12 drafted quarterback to Sean Payton with decent weapons and a pretty good situation and a pretty decent resume overall as a college quarterback. Not great, but pretty decent. Are we going Nix here or a wide receiver?
That's a great question. So, during the live stream, I was very high on Bo Nix. I still am very high on Bo Nix. I'm high on his situation. I especially like the fact that he has 2 terrible, terrible, terrible quarterbacks behind him. I don't think either of those quarterbacks are going to be pressing for his job anytime soon. Peyton's offense tends to be a little bit complex. There tends to be a learning curve. I don't think the weapons they have I don't think it's going to be a high octane offense. I don't think Bo Nix has the talent to make them better, like potentially Drake May, like potentially Jaden Daniels, people like that. So I don't know. That's a tough one. I'm probably going. You can really make the argument, number one, that you should just trade down if possible. Like, you should look at every possibility to trade down, because this tier to me feels very, very flat.
I would take Brian Thomas Jr. I think he was a good enough prospect that went to a very good situation. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of spread there between a lot of good pieces between him, Gabe Davis, Engram, Christian Kirk. I think there's a chance that the ball could spread, but I also think there's a chance for him to kind of step up into that wide receiver 1 spot. And I think his prospect profile is good enough that I think he could do that. And I think that you could have a really good football player on your hands, where I think I said many times before the draft, if your team was all right, it might be a better idea just to sell this pick and go take two wide receivers in the Lad McConkey, Xavier Legette, Ricky Pearsall, Keon Coleman tier, but I do think the situation's good enough that I'd be pretty happy just standing pat with Brian Thomas Jr. here. Now, if I could flip Xavier Worthy for two of those picks, I would. But Brian Thomas Jr. I think has separated himself just enough to me.
Okay, I'm down for that. Let's go with him.
And are we gonna? Do you want to lock in Worthy over Nix, or which way? I'm gonna let you take that one since we.
Let me take that one. Yeah, I'm gonna be the casual here. Give me the guy who has Mahomes throwing to him and has a very, very shaky wide receiver room. He doesn't have a ton of people in front of him that he's got to. And I mean, Kelsey can't keep going on forever. At some point, I mean, at some point, I think this year might be. We'll have a Kelsey discussion at one point in one of our podcasts because I think he's got a really interesting situation coming up, right? Like where he can be still easily the tight end one. Might not be, but could. And but could be retired here in a year. So, but yeah, I'll take probably Xavier Worthy here.
So now I think we get to a really interesting point where I think I am probably a little higher on my 12 guy, but I think we've probably, for most people, we've hit a tier of about 8 to 9 guys that are almost roughly equivalent. Now, does Michael Penix deserve to belong in the tier of the prior 3 guys that we talked about, Thomas, Worthy, and Nix, or does he belong in that lower tier where it's like, I don't care that he got top 8 draft capital, I don't care that he's in a good situation with a lot of weapons. I don't want to hold something. I don't want to spend a first on something that I'm almost certain I'm not getting returned for at least a year, if not 2.
That's me, and I think a lot of people are going to feel like that. But that means he becomes a buy at some point. That becomes, at some point in this draft, he's going to be a really, really good buy. I just don't think it's right here, and I think he belongs in wherever you put Nix. I feel like he belongs in that tier.
Yeah, I would agree. He's basically Nix, but Nix is
in like a reverse situation.
Literally, like lower ceiling, but starts immediately. Has a good situation. Yep. Penix, higher theoretical ceiling. Now, I think he's a very bizarre prospect in that I think almost like a Herbert, where his athletic measurables are exceptionally high, but his rushing stats, I think he technically had like 8 rushing yards if you add up everything. Yeah. College is weird because they take in your sacks with your rushes, which I hate. I think PFF, I looked up on PFF, they have dedicated rushing stats, but I think Drake May or Penix rushed for less yards in his entire college career than Jaden Daniels rushed against Florida this year. So
in one game, yeah.
In one game, which that's a tough time to be a Florida fan. But so Penix does have that rushing upside. He just never really illustrated it. At least his measurables would imply he would. But I do think I agree with you, and I do think that Penix is going to be one of those assets that it's going to be tough because I feel like in theory he's one of those assets that is going to get better, or he's going to rise in value as we get closer to him starting. But he also could. I would have thought that about Hendon Hooker, and Hendon Hooker plummeted off the face of the planet value-wise. He's worth nothing essentially now, mostly just because people are much more certain that Goff is not going to lose his spot. Penix is behind an NFL quarterback, and if Kirk plays well, we could see Penix's value just kind of crater.
Here's what annoys me about this situation is that when I read on Reddit or I read on articles or whatever that Kirk Cousins' contract is really only 2 years long. It's 2 years basically guaranteed, and then they have a big out after 2 years. So it's basically a 2-year contract. Fine, fair enough. But what if he plays really well? So you're telling me he's going to play really well in a shitty division. You guys are going to go to the playoffs. You guys are going to maybe win a playoff game, and then you're going to go, well, F it. We got this guy that we drafted 8th overall, so we're not going to re-sign Kirk Cousins, and we're just, and that could happen. I find it very hard to believe that that would be the scenario. That would be the case.
I mean, it depends on how well he does, because I mean, you could have said the same thing, and I'm not making equivalencies here, but you could have said the same thing about Mahomes sitting behind Alex Smith. Alex Smith is a capable quarterback. Was doing pretty well in Kansas City, not exceptionally, but he was doing well. And Mahomes was Mahomes, and he took the job after a year and then off to the races. Now, does the Falcons organization believe in Penix enough that even if Kirk Cousins plays well this year, he could get kicked to the curb within a year or two? It's a very tough spot, and I think that's probably where most of Penix's value lies. But at the end of it's a very tough thing, because if Kirk wasn't there, does Penix go in the McCarthy range?
If Penix or
if Penix was
Cousins
slotted
is not
start,
there.
if they had not signed
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins and just drafted Michael Penix, where would you have drafted him? Would you have drafted him above May?
Yeah,
He gets
I would've drafted him
Bijan,
fifth.
Bijan, Drake, Pitts, all these players, and he gets the draft capital, and he has the rushing upside that he has not demonstrated, but he has it.
I would consider drafting him above Neighbors. I would consider it. I'm not saying I would. I would probably put him fifth, but I would consider it.
So
He'd be in that tier-ish.
So that's kind of my point, is like, if I think people are using priors that we thought this guy was going to go in the second round. He didn't go in the second round, but it feels like he went in the second round because he just got locked behind a guy. But if he did get top 8 draft capital, and if
Which
he
is insane. I mean, that's insane.
So
That's literally insane.
if he does replace Kirk within a year or two, you're going to take an asset that was basically the 112 and turn it to something that's closer to the 105 in value. And so I think he's the ultimate hold for a team that's tanking. It's just pretty brutal to spend a late first on him.
And it does not seem like, even if Kirk Cousins plays well the first year, it does not seem like his value should decline to Hendon Hooker levels. Even if they go to the AFC Championship game or, whatever. Like, it feels like, or NFC. It just feels like that the consensus is Kirk Cousins has a 2-year contract. When it's up, they're going to replace him with a guy like a Jordan Love, who was sitting behind him, learning the offense, and then he's going to be slotted right in after 2 years, no matter what. And so I think you're going to get by with 1 year of Cousins playing really well, maybe winning a playoff game or whatever. As long as they don't extend him after that first year, which I don't think they will. I find that very hard to believe, right? He just signed a 4-year deal. Could. But I don't think they will. Then that starts the clock then. So now you have to make a decision, because then if he plays well year 2, he might get extended. If he gets extended, then bye-bye, you're late first.
Yeah, I think it's probably one of those situations. I'm going to slot him in at 112 here, but he's almost the ultimate. If you had if you were the 101 and you drafted Caleb Williams and your team's still kind of bad, it's the ultimate 201, where it's like,
oh yes, 100%.
Going to slot him in at 112 just because, again, I think you should take a quarterback over these next tier of guys who are probably a little bit more iffy at wide receiver, running back. But
yeah.
So who's your next pick? We're sitting here. We have our Jonathan Brooks, Ladd McConkey, Leggett, Benson, Pearsall, Coleman, Adnai, Corum. He was your 110. Is Corum still your 110, or at least your 201 in this scenario?
No, I think I'm between two guys. So, I mean, Corum went to a worse situation than I thought. I don't want to say much worse, because I really like that offense, but he's got a guy who I was really high on ahead of him. So, plus Jonathan Brooks went to a way better situation than I thought he was going to be honest with you. So
what situation did you think he was going to be in? What situation do you think he was going to wind up in? I thought he was in a good.
What's that?
I mean, Carolina's a good situation. The best situation would have been the Cowboys, which that's a weird scenario. Well, that's a weird setup.
Them or the Chargers would have been the best. I mean, Carolina is a great situation. So here's my reasoning. Carolina is a great situation to me because the fantasy community, the analytics community, I'm pretty sure we were all very, very low on Chuba Hubbard. Right? And I'm pretty sure we were just as low on Miles Sanders. And so we bought Chuba. I bought Chuba. I was telling people to buy Chuba. not because I thought that Chuba was that great, but because his situation was good, assuming they didn't highly draft a running back. And I did not believe in Miles Sanders. I thought he was a product of that Eagles O line. And so I thought he would be a really cheap, really good RB2 going into next year. So now, Jonathan Brooks comes in, and all he has to do is beat out two people that looked very, very pedestrian over their entire careers.
And recover from an ACL tear.
And by all accounts, he's on track to be ready for training camp, I read. So
Just
I don't
throwing it out
disagree with you. And no, and you make a good point too. A lot of times the rule is you buy post ACL guys after their first year recovered. That's kind of the right. Isn't that kind of the mentality?
Yeah. You don't. Most
Right?
guys
Like
take a year to recover. Brees Hall is probably the exception just because he's so exceptional. But
Sure.
Javonte showed what probably year one off an ACL tear should look like.
Right, and so it might be a very murky-ish RB room at least for the beginning. I do think Jonathan Brooks has the talent to kind of pull away, especially as he gets healthier over the course of the season. So for me, for this pick, it's between Bo Nix and Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks, right? Like I really like his situation. I really like the fact that I don't believe in his running backs behind him. I would go Jonathan Brooks.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think before the draft, I would have probably had maybe a wide receiver or two ahead of him. But I think all of those wide receivers that I would have wanted got dragged down a little bit by their draft capital in the situation. So I think it's kind of left him kind of sitting there as the guy that I would want at this spot, especially because I think, most teams that are, hypothetically, if you're at the 201, you probably need a running back. And you maybe
I was just gonna say that, man.
you
I think
both
a lot
need
of teams need a running back.
you both need a running back, and you also it doesn't hurt you as a 201 to draft a Jonathan Brooks who is going to be someone who probably doesn't come off to a rip roaring start. So you get to kind of have your cake and eat it too, where you can tank, but also you can have your running back, but you can also tank. So it's like, okay, if Jonathan Brooks is good, I just have a running back and I can pivot into maybe contending this year. But it's like if he's not good, it's like, okay, I can just kind of keep my tank going and just pivot it, just continue my rebuild into the following year where running back is supposed to be really, really strong.
Can't you imagine a scenario, the more I think about it, can't you imagine a scenario where as he gets healthier over the course of the season and as everyone, as the realization, not to everyone, I think a lot of people already know, but the realization in reality that Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard just aren't that good. Can't you imagine a scenario where Jonathan Brooks becomes this like crazy big like league winner type scenario, like a Kyron Williams ish situation where like the running backs behind him are not so good, their offense is a lot better, and he's getting healthier. It could all come to fruition all at like this one, week 8 or week 9 moment where everyone's scrambling to buy Jonathan Brooks and he's just he's putting up 20 points per game.
That's possible. I mean, I think I think he's a little bit underrated. He's a weird prospect just because he was stuck behind two really good running backs in Roshan Johnson and Bijan Robinson. But I mean, he forced missed tackles almost as much as Bijan did on a per carry basis or a per touch basis. So we'll see how he does. Moving on,
right.
I think we've hit the tier of, unless you depending on how high you want to put Trey Benson, we've basically just hit the tier of wide receivers at this point.
Yeah.
I'd be curious who your next guy is at wide receiver.
That's a good question. Probably
Because you have some of these first round guys and you have some of these fringe first round guys. So it almost feels like the guys that went early in the NFL draft are kind of the ones that belong in this tier here. Your Ladd McConkey to the Chargers, your Xavier Legette, who the Panthers traded right up into the first round to kind of snag. Ricky Pearsall going to the 49ers at pick 31. Keon Coleman going to the Bills, in theory, a good situation. Adonai Mitchell, an outstanding player who went to a very crowded situation. That kind of feels like what your options are at this point, unless there's someone maybe like a Blake Corum or someone like that who kind of wants who you kind of have from left field.
Yeah, so I mean, I still do like Blake. He's not my 110 like he was a month ago, but I do still like Blake Corum. I believe in Sean Payton. I believe in that offense. I believe they will find ways to
Okay.
get him the ball. I mean, he's going to touch the ball 30 to 40% of the time in a Rams offense that has looked, dare I say, still explosive, like still the
Oh,
same.
I feel like you can't take Corum over some of these wide receivers.
No, I'm not taking Corum
Oh, okay.
over these wide receivers, but
you
I'm
were
saying
you were
they're
going a direction there, and I'm like, hey, let's steer off this way.
no. Well, listen. So in such a bad running back class for a team that might need a running back, I don't think it's crazy here to do so. Again, I think you could trade down and probably take him in a few picks, but I mean, it wouldn't be the craziest thing to take him. Again, it depends. I mean, it takes one Kyron Williams injury to make him maybe the running back 5 of the year. I mean, and Kyron did not hold up well, uh, last year. I mean, there was definitely some lingering injuries, and he was out 3 or 4 games, something like that. But um, I probably would go. I probably would go Lad McConkey.
Funny enough,
Probably
I
would.
I would agree with you just barely. I think I think he had a very good prospect profile in terms of like his route tree and his draft, his film grades, his college stats weren't great, but that's just kind of how Georgia seems to operate. And he
Right.
still had one of the best players in football on the field with him in Bowers, so that kind of takes away from him a little bit. But
Sure.
I would agree. You put a decent a really good prospect profile in a situation like that where he does have the opportunity to really just snatch that job and run with it.
He does, and he's got the quarterback that is going to allow him to be able to have that opportunity. I mean, we're not talking about, the stash trying to get him the ball, 12 times a game, which we know is not going to happen. Herbert can get him the ball. We don't, excuse me, we don't believe Quentin Johnson. I think we both don't believe he is the alpha wide receiver one, going into I don't know if we how we either I don't know how you feel about him. I think he's probably a better buy than some people think, but I don't, again, I'm not dying to gather shares of him. I do like Joshua Palmer quite a bit. I do think he's kind of a jag, but I do think he's going to be in a scenario where he becomes kind of a good buy at a wide receiver for price, but he's like a 2/3.
Jacoby
But
Myers
yeah,
vibe, real Jacoby Myers vibes.
that's a great comp. Yeah, that's a great comp. And again, I prefer builds, as you know, but as the audience may not, I really do prefer builds that devalue the wide receiver position. I like valuing other positions a lot more. So I look to the Jacoby Myers, the Joshua Palmers, the Curtis Samuels, hopefully this year
Tyler
of the
Boyd.
world. And yeah, I know. I got to stop the hype train on him a little. I got to pump the brakes a little bit. But yeah, I think Ladd probably is a great take here. At what are we at? 202.
202. Now
Yeah,
I feel like the next one. This is where this tier gets really flat. I think you could probably argue for any of the next six guys. I
yeah,
would slot in Xavier Legette here, just because again,
yeah,
it's tough that he doesn't really do anything until he's a year five wide receiver, and again at that point he's a man amongst some boys where he's like 22, 23 going up against 18, 19 year olds in some scenarios. But
right.
he did ball out. He was really good. He did get first round draft capital, and he does go to I wouldn't say empty wide receiver room now, especially now that the Panthers did do a really good job of bringing in weapons for the offseason. But there is a vacuum that if he is good, he can kind of just snatch an alpha role and he can his ceiling
Yeah,
and his best case scenario at this point would be like a DK Metcalf, where big bodied,
yeah,
athletic wide receiver, super explosive, and he has the situation where he can just kind of take that opportunity.
yeah. I'm right with you. I mean, situation at this point in the draft is everything, and um, I think we both like Deontay Johnson quite a bit, but we both think that the offense is going to be, I think, way more functional than it was last year. In a
Hope so.
variety of
If it's not, it's
variety
Bryce
of
Young's
ways.
fault
So
at
I
this
think
point.
and that's a great point. That's a great point. So we got to rely upon. So I think with this pick, if you're taking him, taking Xavier, I think you're kind of saying, hey, I do believe in Bryce Young. Um, I don't believe in the Panthers organization, but I do think that he was uh, for a lot of people, the best. Remembering back to the rookie picks last year, and I know Anthony Richardson was really close to being the top quarterback, and Stroud was kind of in the middle-ish, if I recall. Like, I mean, 103, 104, 105. He was like in the Gibbs tier. But I mean, there was a reason why Bryce Young, for most people, was the best quarterback, and so we have to believe in that and realize that, hopefully. And if you think that that's still the case, then I think this is a Xavier pick. So
I would agree. Now, moving on, who's your next guy? Because I think this is a very, again, I'm going to repeat myself. This is an interesting tier. I would probably slot at this point a Trey Benson here, but I think there's a number of wide receivers that you could slot above here. You could even slot a Blake Corum. I know you like him, but and both between him and Benson, there are two guys that are kind of stuck behind entrenched players, but I would probably believe in Trey Benson's talent a little bit more than Blake Corum's, but I'd be curious who you think we should go here.
I not only like Benson's talent probably a little bit better than Corum's, but I also like the fact that he's behind. I think Connor is 28 now and is probably going to be 29 at the start of this season, something like that. And he dealt with soft tissue injuries in the past. He's been, I think he was, what was he? He was injured the first part of last year and then came back and really turned it on the second half.
James Conner's 29 right now.
He's 29 right now. Okay. So, yeah, I think Benson's situation, Kyron, much younger, much better right now than Connor. I mean, Connor's great. Connor's great. Had a great second half of the year. I still believe in Connor to have a decent season. But again, Kyron's just the better running back right now, and he's like 5 years younger. So
also,
give me Benson here.
Who do you think plays more games this year, James Conner or Kyron Williams? James Conner is a bigger guy, but has that punishing style. Kyron Williams a little smaller, also kind of has a little bit of a punishing style, and they tend to want to get him a lot of volume. I almost wonder if the Blake Corum pick is basically just to get Kyron a little bit less volume, probably get him more closer to like 17, 18 touches a game as opposed to the monstrous amount of touches he had at one point this year.
I mean, they were running him out there like CMC. Is what they were doing, and he doesn't have the build. He doesn't have the tackle breaking ability that CMC does. He was taking a lot of hits. He was off injured. He was missing a few games. Yeah, that's exactly why they took him. And so when you're drafting Corum, you have to be realistic. He is not. So I saw somebody the other day say this is another Kenneth Walker III and Charbonnet situation. I don't think that at all. I disagree with that quite a bit. I think this is a man. It's tough for me to come up with another comp right off the top of my head, but this is a 75-25 situation or 70-30 situation to me.
It feels like an Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon situation.
Yeah, there we go.
And I almost think that I kind of think that's I think I saw that comment too. I almost thought that's what that comment implied where you thought he was going to split 50-50, and it really turned out to be more of a 70-30 still. I'd have to go back and look at the touches, but I really would, thinking about it even as we're talking, I do think that the Rams drafted Corum just simply because they don't want to run Kyron out there every single down of the football game, and they felt like they had to last year. Because, I mean, at some point, didn't they have Darrell Henderson back on their roster at one point? Who was the other running back they had? Like, they literally were scraping the bottom of the barrel just to not have Kyron Williams play every single snap of the football game last year.
Yeah, they were bringing in, I mean, I can't remember who it was, but it was like James Robinson or something. They were bringing in people left and right. No, it was it Freeman?
It was. I think you're right. I think it was Royce Freeman, I
think it was Freeman. I know that, I don't know.
That's
I did not know that.
There's many things that you probably should remember, but fantasy, like for all of us, has just kind of taken in that spot in the brain where, our mortgage payment, Royce Freeman, RB2 for the Rams last year. That's the one we want.
Dude, Blake Corum is not going to be, he's not going to be used in a viable way. Probably for like even for PPR. Like, it's not going to be like he's going to be this like pass catching third down back, and he's going to be used in these. The only thing that you could hope for is that he's used in a Jamal Williams on the Lions situation where every time they're at the 1 yard line, they just throw Blake Corum out there and just smash him into a pile, and he ends up with 12 touchdowns or something ridiculous like that. That's the only way to me that he would be viable next year.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. So that
Yeah.
actually that leads him lower down than I would have thought. I
Yeah.
that it does, but it also leads us where we actually have to make a pick now. I think there's a.
Benson.
I would go with Benson here. I would. I think
I
there's
would go with Benson too.
because I think right after this you get a trio of wide receivers that are really interesting, but for their
Yeah.
for their own individual reasons for each of them, I would not take them over a guy like Trey Benson, who I think will potentially have the opportunity to be, who I think is really good, and I think will have the opportunity to be really good, if not this year, next year.
Right. Yep.
So let's see. Go Trey Benson. Now, I missed my click. So maybe let's make sure we're on the same page. Those three wide receivers:
Yeah.
Ricky Pearsall, Keon Coleman, and Adonai Mitchell. Adonai Mitchell, someone
Yeah.
who I would have probably picked maybe at the 110, 111 if he'd have gotten his Chargers landing spot that I was praying he would, or the Bills, or something along those lines, or the Chiefs. I thought the Chiefs might grab him because I thought that fit their scheme a little bit more since they had the Marquise speedy guy on the roster, but I guess that's probably maybe more of a transition piece. You have the Marquise now, Xavier Worthy afterwards to fill in that slot, and then you have your Rice as your underneath guy. But Adonai Mitchell goes to an exceptionally crowded wide receiver weapons room and doesn't have someone who's probably expected to have that much volume. It'd be like going to the Ravens. It's like he's got a good, in theory has a good quarterback. He just doesn't, there's not going to be, the pie is not going to be big enough for Adonai Mitchell to succeed as a fantasy asset.
Yeah, so not only does he get JSN basically probably for a year, and again, Downs is not Tyler Lockett by any stretch of the
As much
imagination.
as I wish he was.
I know. So it's a little. Not only do you have the JSN, but now you have a running quarterback who struggles with intermediate throws and not put together a tape last year passing wise that you could feel confident that he's going to be able to get three people the ball on a consistent basis. Obviously, I adore Anthony Richardson for fantasy purposes, but that hedges more on his rushing ability than anything else. So I put Mitchell kind of way down. Like, to me, he's like the worst of the three, and it's just because of his situation and his quarterback.
I agree with you. He is my three of those. Now I'm curious, who is your two of those, or your one of those? Because I think there's Keon Coleman was someone I was all over early on in the season, and as he continued to not put up a lot of fantasy stats or a lot of wide receiving stats this year, I kind of got a little bit lower on him. It's kind of brutal to see a guy you think be that good and it just doesn't materialize. It almost hurts a little more. But he did get an outstanding landing spot. I can talk left, right, and center about how Xavier Legette goes into a wide receiving room where there's the opportunity to be an alpha. Keon Coleman just entered a wide receiving room that has Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakur as the wide receivers.
Oh. Nasty. No, I know. So, I mean, with the same argument, I mean, I think you got to put him number one.
Yeah, I would tend to agree.
I think you got to put him there.
I had Ricky Pearsall at one above him just because I think I probably believe in his profile a little more, but he's going into a much more crowded situation, and I think he's not. I think Keon Coleman's a lot less crowded situation and gets a lot better quarterback. Even if I don't think he's a complete football player, I do think there's just too many things going in his way to not slot him in here.
Even if I justify taking Pearsall here by saying, you know what, I think Ayuk's going to be traded. He is still going to a situation where the running back is the best pass-catching running back in the entire NFL. Maybe that's,
for only so long, though.
Correct, for only so long, but that's another 1 to 2 years of opportunities being taken away from him. So even if you think Ayuk's going to be traded, it's not like his running back situation is helping his case. It's actually doing the opposite. So I go the other direction here with Coleman. So
that's fair. So I'm going to slot it. I've slotted in Coleman. I'm going to slot in. We agree that it should be Pearsall and then an AD Mitchell.
Yeah.
At some point, AD Mitchell, his talent,
Yeah.
you just
Oh
have
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
you just have
Yeah.
to take, because again, this is a mid-second. This is not an expensive pick. You're getting a guy who might be one of the, the fourth most talented player in this, wide receiver in this class, and you're getting him at what, wide receiver 9, 10 as a mid-second,
Yep.
maybe like a 10th or 11th round startup pick. So I think the only thing that goes against him probably is if you're in a startup draft, you could be looking at AD Mitchell or someone like Deontay or one of these running backs. So he probably, in a startup situation, he probably slides down a little bit, but I think
Right.
in a rookie draft situation, he's probably right here. So that was the end of a big tier for me. I think 19 is where you probably hit the wall in terms of value. I think there's still some stragglers
Yeah.
left that can provide that are in interesting situations, especially from a tight end position. But 19 is probably where the value drops off. I feel like now is probably where you can slot in a Blake Corum, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was just gonna say, this is, to me, this is Blake Corum or like Troy Franklin or somebody like that.
Yeah. One name I want to throw out there, and I think is an interesting name, and it for many reasons, both good and awful, is Jermaine Burton. Jermaine Burton is the wide receiver.
Yeah.
He was Georgia. I think he is Alabama now. Now he's a Cincinnati Bengal, a wide receiver room that, if T. Higgins leaves, is kind of a lot emptier than you would think.
Yeah, kind of wide open.
And he did test outstandingly well. His reception perception is really good. His stats were really good considering his quarterback was a running back for a good portion of the year last year.
Yeah.
The only real, and I think he went in the third round. I saw some draft profiles that put him in more as a second round talent. Now, the reason, again, he goes from a second rounder to a third rounder, and I'm surprised he didn't fall a little bit more, is his off the field issues are dubious to put it.
Yeah.
They're very icky, to put it nicely. I think I saw reports of him assaulting a woman when he was mad at losing a football game. There's a tremendous. He got booted off of basically. He got run out of basically Georgia and Alabama essentially. Leaving a trail of bad feelings in both places. So off the field, character wise, I don't know this person, but every report says this is a red flags all over this guy. But the problem is, this is the NFL, and he's a talented guy going into a good situation, a potentially really good situation.
Could be.
So he's
It'll be really interesting to see what they do with T. Higgins. I mean, Ayuk too, but T. Higgins especially because of this pick.
But yeah, so I think at this point, Jermaine Burton is the last like really good talent on this on the board. But man, it feels I can't not mention all the other things, especially now that the NFL is understandably becoming a lot more sensitive to those kind of topics because they just don't want the PR nightmare. But what was the old quote? If Hannibal Lecter could run a 4.3, they would have diagnosed him with an eating disorder.
Yeah, that's and I will say that it seems like not the NFL necessarily like as an organization, but it does seem like a lot of teams are taking that a lot more seriously. They're taking these issues more seriously. The Lions having to deal with Sutton's issues in the offseason, as an example, like we released him and then it comes. So what happens is I think he turns himself in, which again, we released him because he I think lied to the Lions and then he didn't turn himself in a bunch of things, but he only ended up getting a misdemeanor. Like, I mean, it's not good. I'm not saying any of the things he did were good. They were horrible. And he doesn't seem like a very good person in terms of some of this domestic stuff. But he did only technically get a misdemeanor. He didn't even get a felony. So, I mean, and we just outrightly released him and we ate his contract and he's, on our books for 15 mil or whatever it is. So I do give the Lions and other organizations more credit than I did in the past for some of their no tolerance, to a lot of these issues. So,
yeah. So I think we've hit a tier probably where I think there's some interesting players at this point. I think you have your Troy Franklins, your Jalen Polks. I think this is where a guy like Ben Sinnott, who went I think he went in the second round to Washington as an uber athletic tight end, I think he's a very interesting name. Jatavion Sanders went to the Panthers, a very empty tight end room, who has a very interesting pick. Malachi Corley goes to the Jets. Roman Wilson goes to the Steelers. That would probably be what my next tier of guys would be. It's kind of sad to see Troy Franklin fall to this tier, but it's hard to draft a guy who got drafted in the 4th round any higher than that, higher than where he is right now. It is funny that a guy like Jalen Polk, who I think went in the early second round, is still here. Is that something that maybe we're not factoring in too much, or is it? Are we letting our priors kind of guide us in the wrong direction here, or should we take the fact that he just got 2nd round draft capital into a pretty wide open wide receiver room?
I just don't know. I see. So any inferences or opinions I have about the New England Patriots are going to. This is going to be a great topic for a podcast later on. I need more information. I think we all need more information. I think, what their offense is going to look like. Are they going to be run heavy? Are they going to be more pass heavy? Are they going to start Brissett? I mean, I don't know enough to be confident in taking him. But I agree with you. I mean, his draft capital looks good. His situation looks good. I don't think his quarterback situation is bad now. I think it's kind of good. So probably he's somebody that people should be looking at more, but probably just aren't. So he probably is a good buy. That means.
Yeah, I think you're probably just going to let me slot in whoever I think is probably at this point draftable. So I think to round out the 2nd round,
round it out. You're our rookie expert.
I'm gonna drop Troy Franklin in there at the 210. I'm gonna drop Jalen Polk in there at the 211, and I am going to go out on a limb. I think there's a lot of interesting wide receivers here. Malachi Corley, like I said, Roman Wilson, Javon Baker, who I like as someone who graduated from UCF. But I do think, I think one player we're going to see rise, I think, is going to be a Ben Sinnott, because Ben Sinnott, he's a very athletic guy. He goes into a wide receiver or a tight end room that basically he just got a massive quarterback upgrade. So if Jaden Daniels is good, he's going to have a good he's going to have a good quarterback for the foreseeable future, and he's going to get a year or so to learn under Zach Ertz, you could argue now Trey McBride had a good prospect profile to begin with, but you could argue that getting to learn underneath Zach Ertz really helped his development, and I think it could help in his development. And there's a world where Ben Sinnott should have gone maybe in that Leggett tier, where it's like, especially in tight end premium. In our tight end premium, it's a lot better.
Especially
and maybe in no tight end premium, I think you don't even consider probably a tight end here. Those are those mid to late 3rd picks. But I think here, for our purposes, half tight end premium, I think it's worth slotting in Ben Sinnott as your 212.
Couldn't agree more.
And there we go. There's our first 2 rounds. I think this draft. I'm curious what your takeaways are, but I feel like this draft got. I don't know if it got hurt by the draft class, but I think it got spread out a lot more than I was hoping. There's the tiers that I thought were going to sit there and be very concrete got a lot smoother. So it almost makes more of these these early to mid seconds a lot better than I would have thought they were going to be. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I was just going to say that. No, I was just going to say that. I was just going to say, would I rather have like a 108, 109, or would I rather have like, would you trade 109 for 209 and 210?
109 for 209 and 210? Probably not 209, 210. I would probably I think I wouldn't do the 109. I think I would probably do the 111 for like the 206, 207.
207. Yeah, 207.
Because like I said, 19 is where that value really drops off. So once you're getting into the Blake Corums of the world, I'd still rather have a good football player who I think is in a good situation, like a Bo Nix worthy Brian Thomas Jr. But I mean, when in a league where a draft just started, we already have 2 picks off the board. Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison go 1 and 2. I traded the 201, the 206, and James Conner for the 107, which at the time it felt like a slight overpay, but I wanted to kind of move myself up into that tier. And just to be honest, it didn't work out for me. That's not going to look great because I think that 201. I think you get a James Conner, you get a Brooks, you get a Keon Coleman, Ricky Pearsall. I think you'd rather have that over the 107, where it's going to be like a Roma Dunze, McCarthy, Bowers kind of pick. So you win some, you lose some. That's the risk of speculating in the way that we do.
I can't wait to see who you take. I'm really interested to see if Bowers falls to you. I still believe in Bowers. I still believe in Bowers in the format that we play in.
One tight end premium this league.
One tight end premium. Here's what I'm going to say about Bowers is that as I look at this chart, as I think about one tight end premium, again, this is half tight end premium, so this looks right to me. There are no other picks in this range that, to me, could be league breaking in the way that he can be as early on as he can be, I think. I mean, because he doesn't have that traditional, he doesn't look like Sam Laporta, right? He doesn't have that traditional tight end frame. And so we get really excited thinking about all the different ways that he could be used. And we were just talking about that Las Vegas offense, how it could be really fun and explosive. Man, I can see them doing end arounds with him. Again, we talked about, I think, the Jets not being able to use him appropriately. I do think he has the potential to be used appropriately. And obviously they don't believe too much in Mayer. Previous administration, right? It's just like, are they going to move on? Are they going to trade him? Is he just going to be the tight end too? He just may be the traditional tight end where he plays 50% of snaps. And he goes out and runs, an out route or not an out route, but a flat route. And he just sits in the middle of the field and catches 2 or 3 passes. And then you have Bowers, who they play like a tight end and a little bit like a slot receiver, and they have some out routes and they do some weird things in the red zone.
Almost like a Debo type, where he's more of a weapon than a tight end, whereas Debo's more of a weapon than a wide receiver. I do want to before we get a comment about it, I do want to correct you. Sam Laporta's height and weight is 6'3", 240. Brock Bowers' height and weight is 6'3", 240. So
wait, wait. Stop that. I hate that. No, I'm just kidding. I do like to be corrected when I'm wrong, but Sam Laporta is all. I was gonna say something. He's all up here.
He's a chunky West Coast kid.
He's a chunky West Coast kid. He's all shoulders. He's broad shoulders. He's got, I believe, and so he's got shorter arms. It's just a different physical profile. Now his that's like saying that me and you have the same BMI and you're like ripped out of your mind and I'm like dad bodying it up, but when I watch them on film, when you watch them on tape, they just look totally different, right? Oh, they just look like totally different players.
Kelsey versus Kittle. I understood I understood the spirit of what you meant, but the letter was a little bit off there.
It usually is.
Except when you make trades. But before we derail, right. I think that was a good episode. We got our 2 rounds. I think we got a lot of good thoughts on tape. And I think that's going to be where we sign off. Thank you guys for listening to this week's edition of the Above Average Dynasty podcast.
Thanks, everyone.
Peace.